Victory for free speech with end of libel cost law. Now, this is a little bit of a complicated, nuanced one. Try and stay with me for this. And the reason I want to cover this one is because a certain organisation that I am very, very familiar with gets mentioned in this article. As Rishi Sunak moves to scrap draconian legislation that could make newspapers pay legal costs for both sides in libel and privacy cases, regardless of who wins. So basically, if you sued the newspaper, win or lose, the newspaper had to pay your legal costs as well as their own. But there was a certain caveat. Now, everyone would, so that might make you think, holy shit, why wasn't everyone suing newspapers constantly all the time then, so that we could basically run them into the ground? Well, wait for it. We'll get there in a moment. Rishi Sunak will scrap a controversial law that could make newspapers pay legal costs for both sides in libel and privacy cases, regardless of who wins. Ministers have been concerned about the threat to free speech posed by the draconian legislation. Ministers are not concerned about the threat to freedom of speech, so let's just stop lying to us. Known as Section 40. Now, a repeal of the law will be included in Tuesday's King's Speech, the Mail on Sunday can reveal. A government source told the Ministry of fucking something that a free press is a key part of our democracy. In other words, whoever controls the papers controls the outcome of elections. And that forcing publishers to pay the cost of legal actions, win or lose, risks undermining press freedom. But no, this didn't qualify for any current newspaper. Why not? Well, let's find out. Section 40 of the Crime and Courts Act, to give it its full name, means that news publishers would have to pay the costs of any court judgment if they are not a member of an approved regulator, whatever the outcome of the case. But no national newspapers have signed up to the only state-approved regulator in press, which was established with funding from Max Mosley in the wake of the Leveson inquiry into the press. The Leveson inquiry was part of the phone hacking scandal and all that stuff. It's far too much to go into. If you're British, you know what I'm talking about. If you're a Yank, maybe you know. But basically, a state-approved regulator called in press. So basically, it would only be if newspapers had signed up to that, to being regulated by the state, that they would have to then pay out all this money to legal costs no matter who won the case. So, as a result, no newspaper signed up to the state-approved regulator because that left them open to having to pay out all this money. Instead, they signed up with an independent one. Instead, most national and local newspapers are members of the independent regulator, IPSO. Right now, the problem is with IPSO, they are utterly, absolutely fucking useless. But one of the amazing things about IPSO is you can actually go onto their website and have a look at all of the complaints submitted. And one thing that you will notice is they almost always rule in favour of the paper, right? I think the only time I've ever actually heard IPSO rule in favour of the person that complained about the papers was Katie Hopkins, because they wrote that she was on Valium or something when she passed out in like South Africa, or ketamine or something, and she was like, no, it was heat stroke. Here are like medical records and blood tests proving that I was on no such substances, and IPSO had to force the paper to issue an apology. That is the only time I've ever seen IPSO rule in favour of the complainant. Right, so you see, when it came to me, when I've submitted so many complaints to IPSO. I had hardcore evidence. I was posting the definition of words and stuff like that, basically proving this word was used to describe me. This is false. Here is the definition. And IPSO straight up, I'll try and dig up the email. IPSO just told me, "Oh, papers are allowed to do that," and I was like, "What? Lie? Papers are allowed to lie?" IPSO's not a regulator, by the way. IPSO is a massive con, especially when you find out how many people work at IPSO used to work for the newspapers and are in still very, very close touch with their editors and the people that run these newspapers. IPSO is a joke. IPSO is a complete, absolute joke. Don't bother with IPSO. However, but the reason that they stayed with IPSO is because we're not part of the official government regulator, that means that Section 40 doesn't apply to us. Right, but we'll take it a wee bit further, right? One insider working on the repeal said the draconian law. I love how they're saying, "Oh, making newspapers pay this money. Oh, it's draconian." I think arresting people for tweets is draconian, but hey ho, it seems we have a difference of opinion. A real threat to media freedom. Don't worry, they were lying like fuck anyway. Like, It's not really a threat to media freedom because they're still able to write whatever the fuck they want right now because the regulator IPSO just lets them get away with it. So there's no threat to media freedom whatsoever. There is no threat. They're still able to write whatever the fuck they want. The only time that they maybe couldn't is if they signed up with the government regulator, which none of them did. So there is no issue with media freedom. They still have the freedom. So there is no problem. However, I'll save it for the end. I think there's a reason for this. Right. One insider working on the repeal said the draconian law represents a real threat to media freedom. It's worse than slaps, referring to vexatious legal claims used by the rich to try and muzzle journalists. Meanwhile, politicians and free speech campaigners have warned that the law, which has been in the statute book for years but never brought into effect, has had a chilling effect on free speech and risks financial ruin for publishers. Except it doesn't, because all that happened was no one registered with the regulator. If you're not registered with the government regulator, then it doesn't apply to you. So there is no risk to media freedom, right? But I'll save it for the end. I keep going to shoot my load too early. I apologise. You're just that good. I'm kidding on, but I'll save it for the end, right? Culture Minister Sir John Whittingdale has described it as a sword of Damocles hanging over all sections of the press. I know how important it was for the industry to repeal Section 40, and I certainly never thought it was right for any government to force a state regulator upon them, right? So that's something that they can't do. They can't force the state regulator upon them. What they can do is they can dangle the fucking carrot, though, can't they? Last Monday's Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser said that the government will legislate to tackle unscrupulous lawsuits and spoke out against the full force of legal threats and pressure from the rich and powerful who try to keep their secrets secret. The plan to repeal Section 40 will be set out in the forthcoming media bill and will be seen as a major victory for a free press. But last night, a government source warned that Labour, which opposes the scrapping of Section 40, would reverse the plans. Now, why would Labour oppose the scrapping of it? Maybe it's because they've noticed a little something, the same thing that I've noticed. Right, so they want to protect journalists from slap lawsuits from the rich and powerful. Okay. However, the rich and powerful are all in government. they're all in government. However, because of the way Section 40 is, none of the newspapers want to sign up with the government regulator. Instead, they're with the little useless one, fucking IPSO, that just lets newspapers do whatever the fuck they want. IPSO is a complete farce, by the way. Like, they don't do any work at all. They're an absolute joke. So, how to get the newspapers away from IPSO and into the government-approved regulator. So that's a government regulator that they want all of these newspapers and media companies to sign up with. So this is what I think is going to happen. If the newspapers are smart, right, they're just going to go, oh, Section 40 been repealed, that's nice, and then just continue with IPSO. Because even though they're absolute scumbags, absolute gutter trash, absolute human scum, in fact, not human, just scum, right, the smart thing for them to do would be just to stay with IPSO and do whatever the fuck they want anyway. They write whatever the hell they want right now, and if they stay with IPSO, IPSO will just let them get away with it. That would be the smart thing to do. But and Section 40 still doesn't apply to them. It didn't apply to them in the first place in that case. So with Section 40 gone, it really makes no difference. However, the government are going to dangle the carrot a little bit and get these newspapers to sign up with the government regulator. So just a government regulator, government regulation of the media and the press. So this isn't, trying to improve freedom of speech. This is trying to trick the newspapers to sign up with the government regulator so that the government can then regulate all the newspapers. I mean, clever, bit too obvious. It's a little bit too obvious, and it's clever, but either way, I don't really care because, fuck corporate journalists.